9 words. That's all it took. 9 words spoken directly to the most powerful man on earth, in a room that was never supposed to have cameras, by a leader who had spent 18 months being dismissed, underestimated, and publicly humiliated on the world stage. And when those 9 words landed, the chief of staff physically stepped backward. The British Prime Minister covered his mouth. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing broadcast to 800 million people in the history of the G7. Stay with me, because by the time you hear exactly what was said and why it was said at that precise moment, you will never look at silence the same way again. If you want to understand what actually happened in that room, you need to understand what was supposed to happen. The bilateral meeting between Mark Carney and Donald Trump at the G7 summit in Biarritz was scheduled for 3:45 in the afternoon. 15 minutes, scripted, safe. The kind of meeting where 2 leaders perform cooperation for cameras, say carefully prepared nothing, and let their back-channel teams do the real work before and after. The American advance team had coordinated a standard press arrangement. 4 minutes of cameras at the opening handshake, then journalists escorted out, then private session. What they had not coordinated, because no one on the American side had flagged it, was a procedural request submitted by the Canadian delegation through summit organizers 3 days earlier. The Canadians had asked for the bilateral session to remain fully open to press for its entire duration. The request was unusual. It was not unprecedented. And the American advance team, in what a senior White House official would later describe internally as a catastrophic planning oversight, approved it without escalating to senior staff. Trump's team believed cameras were leaving after 4 minutes. The cameras never left, and Carney had known that for 3 days. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear explains not just a diplomatic confrontation, but a masterclass in how power actually works. The first 3 minutes of the session followed the expected script. Trump opened with trade volumes, bilateral warmth, the tremendous relationship between the two countries. His register was performative and public-facing, calibrated for the cameras he believed were about to leave. Carney responded with 30 seconds of reciprocal pleasantries. Then he paused. 4 seconds. In a diplomatic setting, 4 seconds of silence is not awkward. It is a statement. He placed both hands flat on the table. He looked directly at Trump, not at the cameras, not at his own delegation, not at the officials flanking the president. And his tone shifted from diplomatic to something the journalists in the room would later describe as prosecutorial. "Mr. President," Carney said, "I want to address something directly, because I think directness is something you value, and something this relationship has lacked." Trump's posture changed. The relaxed, performative lean he uses for bilateral photo opportunities tightened into something more guarded, more upright. Carney did not wait for a response. "Over the past 18 months, your administration has imposed tariffs on Canadian goods that have cost American consumers $11 billion. You have called for the resignation of a democratically elected leader on live television. You have threatened to seize Canadian port infrastructure. You have redirected disaster relief funding from communities that needed it. And through all of it, Canada's response has been measured, patient, restrained." Another pause. 2 seconds. His eyes never moved. "You mistake silence for agreement. Let me correct that." The room produced no sound. 12 journalists, 6 camera operators, 8 senior officials from each side, translators, security, summit staff in the corridor, complete silence. And Trump, for the first time in a bilateral setting in recent memory, had no immediate answer. That phrase, "you mistake silence for agreement," was the most viewed clip on every major platform within 2 hours of the session ending. 300 million views before midnight, trending in 41 countries simultaneously. The Financial Times ran 5 words across its front page: "The defender becomes the aggressor." But here is what most of the coverage missed entirely, and why this moment is far more significant than a powerful soundbite. What Carney said next is what changed the structural reality of the room permanently. "Canada has not been silent because we accept what you have done. We have been silent because we were preparing." He let that word sit in the air. Preparing our economy to function without dependence on the United States. Preparing our trade relationships to survive without American cooperation. Preparing our energy infrastructure, our supply chains, our financial systems, our diplomatic alliances, and our defense posture for the possibility, which your actions have made a probability, that the United States is no longer a reliable partner. The word reliable landed like a verdict. Trump's jaw tightened visibly on camera. Every tariff you imposed, we rerouted. Every threat you made, we diversified around. Every demand you issued, we used as evidence to build coalitions with nations who share our concern that American foreign policy has become indistinguishable from American aggression. You gave us 18 months. We used every day of it. I came here today not to negotiate, because negotiation requires a partner acting in good faith, but to inform you directly, personally, with the cameras running, that the Canada you think you are dealing with no longer exists. The Canada you are dealing with now is the one your policies created. Trump's response was 4 words. That's a very nasty statement. Delivered low, clipped, the rally register deployed in a room that required something else entirely. Carney did not react. He waited 3 seconds. Then he said, quietly, with the composure of someone who had rehearsed every variable, "It's not a nasty statement, Mr. President. It's a factual one. And the fact that you can't tell the difference is the reason we're here. Now stay with me, because what most people still do not know is that this confrontation was not the product of patience finally breaking. It was not frustration boiling over after 18 months of provocation. It was the coldest, most calculated strategic decision of Carney's entire tenure as Prime Minister, triggered by intelligence received exactly 72 hours before the summit began. 3 days before Biarritz, Canadian intelligence was briefed on a classified American planning document that had been distributed through Five Eyes channels to a recipient list that was not supposed to include Canadian recipients. The document outlined a proposed executive order, drafted but not yet signed, that would unilaterally reclassify Canadian energy exports as a national security dependency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, granting the President authority to set prices, control volumes, and effectively direct the flow of Canadian oil, gas, and electricity into the United States without Canadian consent and without requiring congressional approval. The order was scheduled to be signed the week after the G7 summit. The timing was deliberate. The White House intended to use the summit's closing photo opportunity as a display of normalcy and allied cooperation, and then announce the executive order 72 hours later, framing it as routine national security policy. Carney's inner circle debated for 36 hours. Every conventional option was on the table: diplomatic protest, retaliatory tariffs, international legal challenge, public condemnation after the order was signed. Every option was reactive. Every option handed the White House control of the timing, the framing, and the narrative. And Carney, after listening to every advisor present every option, said the thing that ended the debate. They want the photograph of us looking cooperative 3 days before they try to seize control of our energy sector. I am not giving them that photograph. And I am not waiting for them to act so we can react. We go first. We go public. And we do it while the cameras are still running. This is the part that matters most, and it is the part that almost no political analysis has correctly identified. Carney did not confront Trump because the confrontation was emotionally necessary. He confronted Trump because the confrontation made it structurally impossible for the executive order to be signed. Any action taken against Canada in the days following a moment where the entire world had just watched Trump sit in silence while Carney dismantled the relationship on live television would be read universally not as policy, but as retaliation. Not as national security, but as personal vendetta. The executive order, if signed after Biarritz, would not be framed as a regulatory action. It would be framed as a wounded president punishing a country that embarrassed him. Carney did not just confront Trump. He preempted the order by making the political cost of signing it prohibitive, and he did it on a stage the White House believed it controlled. With cameras the White House had accidentally approved. In a session the White House had expected to be 15 minutes of scripted nothing. The Canadian dollar surged to its strongest position in 12 months within hours of the footage spreading. Currency traders called it the Carney premium, the market pricing in the perception that Canada's leader had established psychological dominance over the most powerful figure in the room. Warren Buffett, when asked to comment, did not discuss the politics. He discussed the principle. In 70 years of business and investing, I have learned that the single most important moment in any conflict, any negotiation, any competition, is the moment one side seizes initiative. Not the moment with the strongest argument, not the moment with the largest economy, The moment when one side decides to act instead of react. Because initiative changes the psychology of everyone in the room and everyone watching. The side that acts looks like a leader. The side that reacts looks like a follower. And once the world decides who is leading and who is following, reversing that perception requires something close to a miracle. Mark Carney spent 18 months reacting to Donald Trump, and he reacted brilliantly. Precise counter-tariffs, visionary diversification, masterful coalition building. But he was always second, always responding, always playing on a board that someone else had constructed. What he did in Biarritz was stop adapting and set his own board. He chose the terrain, a live bilateral session with cameras running. He chose the timing, 3 days before an executive order that would have permanently altered the relationship. He chose the weapon, direct public honesty delivered with more composure than the man receiving it could summon in response. And the world watched the person who had built an entire political identity on confrontation get out-confronted in public by someone who had studied him for 18 months and then used his own method with more precision and more devastating effect than he had ever managed himself. The deeper analysis here is what Buffett identified as the paradox that transforms this from a diplomatic incident into a structural shift. Trump's power has always rested on the asymmetry of willingness. He was willing to confront publicly when others were not. He was willing to say the aggressive thing, the uncomfortable thing, the thing that diplomatic norms prohibit. And that willingness created leverage because the leverage depends on the other side obeying the norm while he violates it. Carney violated the norm. Carney confronted directly, publicly, on live television, looking into the president's eyes across a table where their water glasses were nearly touching, and said the thing that no allied leader was supposed to say. But he said it with analytical precision instead of emotional heat. He said it with a briefing document memorized instead of a grievance list improvised. He said it having spent 72 hours preparing for every possible response. Trump's confrontations are reactive and unscripted. Carney's was preemptive and rehearsed to the syllable. Trump did not just lose a confrontation in Biarritz. He lost ownership of confrontation as a political tool. The signature weapon of his foreign policy brand was used against him by someone who wielded it with greater discipline, greater preparation, and greater effect. And 800 million people watched it happen in real time. The Japanese Asahi Shimbun editorial board wrote that the confrontation signaled the end of the assumption that American primacy in allied relationships is permanent and unchallenged. Le Monde called it the most consequential diplomatic exchange between Western allies since de Gaulle withdrew France from NATO's unified military command. Every analysis, in every language, in every country, reached the same conclusion. Something fundamental had changed, not only in the relationship between the United States and Canada, but in the architecture of how smaller democracies understand their relationship to American power. We track this story daily because it is not over. The executive order has not been signed, but it has not been withdrawn. The diplomatic fallout from Biarritz is still moving through back channels in ways that will not be visible for weeks. What is already visible is the structural change Buffett identified. Initiative has changed hands. And as he has observed across 7 decades of watching power operate in business and in life, once initiative changes hands in a confrontation of this scale, the person who lost it spends every subsequent moment reacting, recalculating, and attempting to recover ground on terrain that is no longer theirs. Canada is no longer the country absorbing the pressure. Canada is the country that revealed the arsenal. And what the arsenal contains and how it will be deployed is the question that every foreign ministry on earth is now trying to answer. If this analysis clarified something the headlines missed, share it with one person who needs the full picture. Drop your read on this in the comments. Was Carney's move a masterstroke or a gamble that could still backfire? We go deeper on stories like this every single day. So if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment to change that.